Hi everyone, I'm Teemu Kääriäinen from the Digital Identity Business Unit, the practice lead of external identity and access management solutions in Nixu. I look after the technologies that we utilize to deliver consumer and B2B IAM solutions to our customers. Like Juhani Mäkelä said in his previous presentation, that it's always good to start with a little bit of history. I'm not going to start with the ancient Romans, but with some personal history. Before starting at Nixu at 2012, I worked over 5 years at Nokia building their consumer identity management, and the world was quite different 12 years ago. We were dealing with technologies such as SAML 2.0, OAuth 1.0, really unbelievably hairy stuff to work with. I can still recall the first time that I saw the Facebook Graph API and the associated OAuth 2 specification, which basically put the developer productivity, ease of integrations, and enough level of security to the focus. That was actually something that paves the way forward when improving the technologies, but it tends to take quite a while. It has taken over 10 years for us to be in the position that the OAuth 2 and the OpenID Connect are mainstream today. So things tend to move quite slowly in our domain. But again, we are at the edge of a revolution. There's basically a fundamental change in the way how we perceive distributed systems when we talk about blockchain-based solutions. So people quite often come to me that, yeah, Teemu, it's cool that you work with blockchain technologies, but how about those cryptocurrencies and Bitcoins and Ethereum smart contracts disrupting the market? That's all nice. That's only part of the truth. Those are only a couple of the functional areas where blockchain technologies are applicable. They have, in a sense, corrupted the discussion that we have around blockchains, because the fact is that blockchains, as decentralized ledger technologies, bring real benefit in terms of resiliency, data immutability, consistency, and transparency. We've been discussing quite a lot among the Finnish blockchain community about this change in our perceptions and the ways how we see the blockchain technologies. Antti Kettunen from Tieto, one of the top-notch blockchain experts in Finland, said that if it took us 10 years to move from the old XML and SOAP and SAML-based technologies to the current RESTful APIs, JSON data structures, OpenID Connect-based federations, it's going to take at least the same time for us to move to the decentralized side. And we're just taking the first steps around that area. Gartner, in their hype cycle, is a bit more optimistic. We've gone to the phase where we actually understand the limitations and the possibilities the blockchain technologies bring. But they say that the maturity will be happening in the next 5 to 10 years. I really love EU. I think they do a great job in some areas. They bring together people in forums from different member states, focusing on some areas that are relevant for them. One of the initiatives in the EU is the EU Blockchain Observatory, whose purpose is to basically promote the adoption of blockchain technologies in public sector services. They bring in the details of the challenges, the risks, and the benefits associated to the adoption of blockchain technologies in public sector. And it obviously warms my heart to see that they have raised the digital identity as the #1 item needed in place in order for the blockchain technologies to actually gain widespread adoption. It's actually quite clear if you look at the other use cases, healthcare, e-voting. In all of these, the identity is the foundation on top of which you build these solutions. If you want to allow individuals to vote, you possibly want to strongly identify them. Same applies to the healthcare. If you're visiting a doctor, you most likely want to verify that they're a legitimate doctor. The way how the digital identities materialize around blockchain and in decentralized technologies is through self-sovereign identities and decentralized identities. These terms are basically interchangeable. And the Germans have actually done a pretty good job of writing a position paper about the self-sovereign identities, and they state that as representatives of the blockchain industry, we see the self-sovereign identity as a fundamental building block for the success of blockchain-based innovation. I think this is quite much from German, who are known to be pragmatic, very analytic, and they see the added value of the digital identity as an enabler of blockchain-based innovation. So when we consider the transition from the existing centralized identity solutions to the decentralized ones, we basically have the exact same players. We have the identity holder, who is the individual, the end user. We have an issuing party, who is issuing the credential that the individual is using. And we have the relying party, who uses this identification that happens against the issuing party when the identity holder authenticates. In the centralized world, when you're, for instance, accessing an online banking service, how the flow works is that you first authenticate to your online bank, you provide a consent that the bank can share your personal information with this relying party. But the individual is not truly in control of how the information is being shared. And the information is often quite limited. It's a username and a social security number. Using the social security number as the unique identifier has problems, because you can basically correlate it, and especially in the public sector, there are many cases where this is still being used as an authentication method in itself and as a unique identifier. When we move to the decentralized world, our goal is to bring the identity holder, the individual, to the middle, so that they are in control of the ways how their personal information is being used and being shared. And the concept of the identity holder can actually be extended so that it's no longer an individual, but it can also be an organization, a company, or a public sector organization, or it can be a thing from the IoT side. The concepts are exactly the same. These identity holders will have a wallet where they store verifiable credentials issued by issuing parties, which are digitally signed documents claiming something about the identity holder. They can be basically anything that is currently managed by government institutions or private sector companies. Or they can be information that the individuals tell about themselves. So basically self-attested verifiable credentials. After the end user, the identity holder, has these available in their wallet, they can generate proofs out of them. And they can be in control of what information they share with the relying parties. With this kind of an approach, we can build a way to get data moving in a way that is secure and that is built on an existing strong cryptographic basis. So companies and organizations have invested huge amounts of money in their existing identity and access management solutions. So when you go to companies and start telling this story about decentralized identities and how it's going to change the world, they basically look at their existing solution that we're okay with what we have in place. We can do API access control, we can authenticate users strongly, we can do consent management. So why do we need anything else than what we have in place at the moment? So basically this is a transition, and we're basically taking just the first steps in this area from moving to the centralized to the decentralized world. And the way how the development has been going is that the innovations in the centralized side and the innovations in the decentralized side have been developing in silos. There has been very little cooperation between these two separate silos. And what we need is mechanisms how to bridge this gap between the different parties and have ways, concrete tools, how we can transition from the existing ways of working to the decentralized ones. In the context of Finland, we're kind of an economy that is pretty nice in its size, that we can get people to the same table from all different kinds of organizations, financial, governmental, universities, private sectors. And out of this work, we have basically two initiatives going on in Finland. One is the Findi identity ledger. So in order for us to get forward with decentralized identity solutions, we need an identity ledger. And we have chosen the Hyperledger Indy technologies as the way forward. Hyperledger is an umbrella project governed by the Linux Foundation, developing different blockchain-related technologies for different sectors. They have the Hyperledger Fabric, which basically contains the technology to take care of the low-level parts of the ledger interactions, meaning the peer-to-peer communications, the consensus mechanisms, everything that you have happening in the ledger level. On top of that, there are different business-related implementations, out of which Hyperledger Indy is one of them. It provides the mechanisms for us to build solutions that take advantage of verifiable credential technologies while having a private permissioned blockchain that we can operate in the Finnish context. We have a development ledger running where we have 5 nodes basically verifying the transactions, giving us the possibility to actually try out these technologies instead of just showing nice slides and telling about how this is going to change the world. We have OP Bank, Nordea, Nixu, Tieto, one of the biggest IT integrators in the Nordics, and Asiakastieto, a company managing a multitude of B2B databases running these nodes. Then the SISU ID. SISU ID is an open identity ecosystem whose purpose is to provide a strong digital identity with enrollment capabilities with mobile devices, mobile authenticators, and all of these to support global users with easily usable, strong digital identities. So in this context, the SISU ID is quite naturally an issuer of identity credential, and it has a role in this context. With these two initiatives, we're paving the way forward so that we actually have something concrete that we can work with. So what are really the benefits? The benefits of moving to using the decentralized solutions. That is the thing that the business wants to know. What is the added value? I'll try to summarize this with some concrete examples. Basically, it boils down to three things. We get the data moving. We have the existing API-based integrations with the X-Road in Finland and the different APIs that the government sector institutions are publishing. But quite often, these end up being point-to-point integrations with quite difficult contractual obligations between different parties, which bring friction to the innovation and to the flexibility of building new capabilities. Another side is the thinking of bringing individuals in control of the ways how their personal data is being shared and used. And the third point, well, it's just cool to work with blockchain-based technologies. It's new, it's fancy, and we can basically take advantage of all the different benefits that it brings in terms of resiliency, data immutability, consistency, and transparency. Interoperability is usually the thing that we start off with. So whenever we start a project with our customers to see if the verifiable credential technologies is something that could be useful for them, we look at the customer's data assets. What kind of data do they have? Is it, for instance, construction sector competence information and certifications with one of our customers, Tilaajavastu? Or is it driver's license information issued by Finnish Traffic Safety Agency? One of the key components of identity ledgers is the fact that the schemas and the associated credential definitions are managed in the ledger. It's public information, it's cryptographically secure, it supports versioning, and you can basically build overlays so that you can incorporate additional layers of information to the verifiable credentials, for instance, in the form of consents. What we have done in the Findi and in the SISU ID project can be basically seen here. This is a screenshot of the Findi development ledger monitoring node displaying the identity schema that we have deployed there. And it's backed by the eIDAS regulation from EU, which basically defines the attributes that we need to collect about an individual end user. And this is actually compatible. We actually got this information from the InfoCert, which is an Italian company, basically doing the same thing that we're doing with Findi in Finland, but they're doing it in Italy. And they actually have a similar kind of initiative in Austria, where they are setting up a national identity ledger. Because it's just easier to have national identity ledgers where you can build trust among the different parties taking part running the network. And then there's possibility to support these cross-border use cases by building kind of a network of networks where individual country-specific ledgers can trust the verifiable credentials issued in another country. So let's say that SISU ID issues an identity credential for Finland. Then you could go to Italy or Austria and use that identity in those countries in a manner that the Italian or Austrian network trusts the Finnish network. We're also working with the Canadians. What they have in place is the Pan-Canadian Trust Framework. They are actually digitalizing many of the government sector processes through identity ledgers. And that's also one counterpart for us to share information, share experiences, and share data models to guarantee interoperability. When thinking about the different players that you have within the network, it's easy to see that we're actually supporting completely new types of interactions between individual end users, organizations, and things. So there can be interactions between an end user and an IoT device enabled by the verifiable credentials and the identity ledgers, so that you can, for instance, claim ownership of a device. You can have completely different use cases between organizations and individuals, because basically, at least in Finland, it hasn't been possible for an organization to, for instance, do digital signing as an organization. It has always been working through delegation. So you delegate the ability for an individual to act on behalf of an organization. And this is a pretty powerful approach going forward. Underlying all this is the trust model. So far in the centralized approaches, the trust has been one way. So you are providing your credentials to your online bank, which trusts you because you provided the valid credentials. In the decentralized side, the trust is two-way. So there needs to be a mutual trust between the different parties. So an individual end user and the other end of the interaction, for instance, the issuer of the credential, both need to sign the interaction that they are having. And this can be achieved with pairwise pseudonymous DIDs that form the basis for the secure communication between these two parties. And this provides the basis of the security of the solution. So you might be asking, so where's the blockchain? You don't actually need it. You can also do this without the blockchain. And that's actually a good thing going forward, because we can basically take a gradual approach so that we start building the interactions between the different parties using these same verifiable credential mechanisms without the blockchain. What the blockchain brings is an additional level of security. So it's basically a distributed lookup table from which it's possible to identify the other party is actually the one that they are claiming to be. The second thing that the ledger brings is that it's a distributed revocation registry. So if you think about the verifiable credentials, driver's licenses, authorizations, ID cards, they all may expire. You may lose your driver's license if you are, for instance, drinking and driving. And what happens actually at this point is that the issuer updates the revocation registry, indicating that the driver's license credential is no longer valid. And this information is actually directly available for all the parties in the network. I'm pretty sure that this sounds quite familiar with people who have been working with traditional PKI in the past. Revocation registries, they're basically the same thing as CRLs. You have the CAs, similar kind of approaches. So when you have the credential in your wallet, you can basically list them and see them. So the wallet is basically a mobile application. And out of these credentials, which may be, for instance, your identity. You can generate proofs. Proofs are information, digitally signed, that you provide to relying parties when you want to tell something about yourself. And the verifier has the possibility to verify the authenticity of this information. So how this usually works in the traditional world. So thinking about the Facebook and different social identity providers, you can basically build same kind of interactions that you would have when dealing with verifiable credentials. Except that if you, for instance, have a case where there's a cafeteria owner who wants you to like their cafe in the Facebook to get a free coffee, they get quite a bunch of information about you, your name, your age. You possibly have children, you work at Nixu, you've joined Facebook 2007 and so on. Why do they need this information? There should be no need for the individual coffee shop owner to basically identify you to this level. So when we're moving these use cases to the verifiable credential side, you are actually in control of what information you share. Usually it is enough for the coffee shop owner to basically do some kind of analytics, understand their customers better, what kind of people are accessing the coffee shop at what time. So for them, it should be enough to say that you're a 38-year-old man from Finland. And if you go back and think about the Facebook case, if there's another coffee shop at the opposite side of the street, having the exact same functionality, the Facebook knows that you have visited these both places. But with the possibility of having persona-based integrations per connection with pseudonymous pairwise identifiers, these two different coffee shops can be kept completely separate without actually knowing that you have been actually visiting both. You are the only one who knows that you have been visiting those. Government institutions sit on top of quite a pile of data. There's all kinds of information that is difficult to get moving nowadays. And the approach that they have is usually that this is something that is in conflict with what they are doing at the moment. But this is just actually another way, another secure way of getting the data moving. So you can still continue to have your existing processes, your API interfaces, all the things that you have invested huge amounts of money in the past tens of years, and build this on top of that, so that you have issuing parties that generate verifiable credentials out of these data assets, make them available for the individuals to be used in their wallets, and basically enable completely new kind of business to evolve in the relying party side. So at this point, we are actually getting away of a lot of friction that the relying parties may have when doing these point-to-point integrations with different APIs, with the private sector or government, and actually having a possibility to have a catalog to see what kind of data is available from the network as verifiable credentials, and build your use cases around those. I'm a firm believer that competition fosters innovation. The UX is a key part of the verifiable credentials related processes. So I believe that competitive advantage can be gained if you're capable of building solutions, whether credential issuing or wallet-based applications that are actually more usable. And there's actually a business-related motivation to this. So if you have issuers, you can basically have transaction-based billing for some of these credentials. So you can actually create new B2C and B2B-based marketplaces around these concepts. The UX is a really complex issue, especially when dealing with smart devices, mobile applications. It may be easy in the beginning when you have individual verifiable credentials, driver's licenses, couple of authorizations, ID card, something like that. It's easy to manage. But if this expands, you may end up having hundreds of verifiable credentials in your wallet. You can only imagine what it would be like in the physical world if you had all the information that you have about the different authorizations, your employee identity, all the different tickets and all that information in a single wallet. It's quite a challenge. Moving on to the actual reality around these technologies. So even though we have had the possibility to take the first concrete steps towards actual implementations of using decentralized identities in the Findi network through pilot cases such as working together with the OP Bank, who's actually building a mobile wallet solution to solve the use cases for delegation and authorization, and having the possibility to export the SISU ID identity as a verifiable credential to the OP Bank wallet, and seeing how the interactions work and how the UX works, there's still quite a lot of things to do. One of the things, the obstacles, is the fact that many of the specifications and the protocols are quite immature. They're in constant change since there's different players in the market, and not all the specifications are at the same RFC level compared to, for instance, OpenID Connect and OAuth 2. So when starting to build these solutions at this point, there's a risk that there will be backwards incompatible changes happening in the specifications. Another fact is that you should never forget that you're working on top of a blockchain-based solution. So all the same risks that are associated to the blockchain technologies are applicable here. You want to be very sure what your governance model is like. What kind of players, what kind of consensus model you have in your network. In the Finnish context, it has been fairly straightforward to have these different parties in the Findi network getting the common understanding of what is the rule book, how do we do different roles within the network. So the Hyperledger Indy has a multi-layer hierarchical role model for the different parties in the network, governing the process of how transactions are accepted. And the third thing being that you obviously need a business model. Running the network nodes and basically building the governance processes that are in complexity comparable to running traditional PKI is not an easy job, especially in the production environment, and especially if you are in the role of a trustee or a steward, which are basically the key players when keeping the network secure. So this is not a charity. Basically, nobody wants to run these nodes without actually seeing some monetary benefit out of it. The third thing is the fact that we're building these wallet solutions on top of mobile operating systems and their keychain solutions as the secure storage for the private key information. This is quite a challenging approach, especially with the heterogenic landscape of Android devices and their keychain technologies, how can you actually guarantee that your keychain is secure to store this information? So as I said about the immaturity of the protocols and the specifications, one of the ways how we want to tackle this when doing actual customer assignments, pilots and projects is through the fact that the market is actually maturing towards providing a middleware which makes it possible to hide the dirty details of the agent-to-agent protocol communications and the ledger interactions behind a well-defined set of RESTful APIs, so that if there's change in the ways how these agents communicate or the information that needs to be handled when interacting with the ledger, it can be hidden behind this middleware. Our goal is to become the go-to partner for technology consulting of decentralized identity solutions. And these are the technologies that we will start off with. Hyperledger Indie Catalyst is an open source Python-based backend offering RESTful API on top of the common verifiable credential related use cases that you can put in place. It's ledger agnostic, it runs against FINDI, and it offers a set of APIs on top of which you can build your use cases. You don't need to focus to the details of the ledgers and the agent communications, but you can actually start doing the real business cases that bring real business value to the customers. Whether it's launching some new verifiable credentials to the market, or building wallet implementations, or actually utilizing the information that you would be getting from the FINDI network. Luckily, we have also commercial players. Evernym is the company behind the Sovereign Foundation and the Sovereign Identity Ledger, which is a global identity ledger platform. And they have the Evernym Verity, which basically serves the same purpose what the Indie Catalyst does, but it's a commercial product, backed by a commercial company with real support models and so on. And they actually provide a nice set of SDKs to build the wallet implementations or to incorporate any of the verifiable credential related interactions to your mobile applications or web applications. So this ends my presentation. So as a summary, what we want to achieve when we are transitioning from the centralized identity solutions to the decentralized ones is the ability for us to get the data moving in completely new ways, fostering innovation and doing it in such a way that it lets the individuals to be in control of their own data and building it on blockchain technologies and taking advantage of all the benefits that they bring. The SISU ID and the FINDI work continues. We're planning of having technical training in Nixu in the coming autumn around the Hyperledger Indie technologies. So if you're interested in joining this, please contact me. And for the business stuff, Jonathan Henriksson is the person to go for with anything related to FINDI or anything related to SISU ID, or actually anything related to decentralized identities. You may have some customers who actually might have some business cases around this. I'll be continuing the talk around this same topic in the upcoming My Data conference in Helsinki in September. So if you're interested in joining a bunch of people with different backgrounds from business, legal, and technical backgrounds, discussing the possibilities of my data, fair data economy, self-sovereign identities, that's a great place to get familiar with those. We have already a couple of people joining in addition to me, Tuisku Sarrala from the privacy team with especially focus on the AI ethics side, so there's a separate track for that. I'll be focusing on the decentralized identities, and we have Ville Niemi, who's the business manager for this stuff in the DI business unit. Thank you very much for your attention.